Well, it's Friday, and we get the new update this coming Monday. AGS was kind enough to give us the patch notes. Today's video, I'm just going to go over all of the new stuff. We're going to take a look at the new sets, going to take a look at some of the new perks that are in the game as well, and I'll link the rest of the patch notes down below if you guys want to read through all of them by yourself. Before we jump into the new coming set bonuses, the first thing I want to mention is that all weapons will now have dual scaling, but with different amounts. We're going to see what those amounts are when we actually get into the patch because it does not say in the patch notes. But dual scaling is confirmed. That is a really big deal. The hardy functionality has been added to rings, so you no longer need to have hardy as a perk. And then gambled energy is going to be the new perk that replaces hardy, which grants 2.5 to 5% increased damage while stamina is not full. So any of your hardy rings are still going to be pretty good rings, I think. All amulets will now give up to 5% max hit points based on the gear score of the amulet. All rings will give up to 10% base damage based on gear score, and earrings will have a 5% flat cooldown reduction based on gear score as well. So a lot of balance changes are coming, but these are the big ones we want to look at, the set bonuses. The first set that we get to take a look at is the Enrage set. One piece, you hit a target within 13 meters and you grant a stack of Enrage, increasing your outgoing damage by 1% and increasing attacker base damage by 0.5%. So you increase the damage you take to a max of 10 stacks. And they did note that some slower weapons will generate 2 rage stacks per hit due to the slower attack rate. So we'll see which weapons do that, but I'm thinking probably the two-handed weapons and maybe something like musket. 3 equipped increase the max enrage to 15 for stacks, and then the heavy attack will generate an additional stack of enrage. While enraged and above 70% health, you lose 5% of your max health every half second. And then at 5 pieces, your max enrage stacks are now 25. You increase the duration of enrage by 50%. And while enraged, all your attacks will deal an additional 8% bonus damage while below 70% health. So that's kind of tying into the functionality of the 3-piece there. Now, infixes, these are going to be unique perks attached to enraged set piece items, and individual pieces will have a chance of rolling these perks. The first infixed is Enraged Leech. While enraged, all attacks gain 20% lifesteal while you are below 70% health. Trenchant Enrage, while enraged, heavy attacks will now consume 3 stacks and deal 20% more damage. That is a huge damage increase. Enraged Hunt, when exiting a dodge with more than 20 stamina and enraged, you consume 4 stacks to trigger a 3.5 meter radius AoE that will pull in nearby enemies. Oh my god, I am not excited for this one. I'll be honest. This one is going to be really, really rough to deal with in PvP. We'll see how it plays out, but I do not like pull sets like that. Enraged Refresh. Hitting a target with a light or heavy attack while above or at 15 stacks of Enrage will consume 3 stacks and reduce the cooldown of all active weapon abilities by 5%. And then Enraged Acceleration. While at or above 15% stacks of Enrage, you gain 8% haste. So yeah, it seems like it's not just the set itself. There's going to be a lot attached to the set. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of builds we get coming out of this, because that's just the first set that we get a look at. The second wind set is the second one at 2 pieces. While exhausted, you do 20% more base damage against enemies within 5 meters. Hitting an enemy within 5 meters will remove the slow from becoming exhausted by dodging. Oh my god, that is crazy good. And then at the 4 pieces, while exhausted, attacks that hit an enemy within 5 meters will have a 10% lifesteal, grant 3% empower, and or empower stack that lasts for 5 seconds when exiting the exhausted state. And then the infixes for this particular set. Relentless Second Wind. While exhausted, you gain uninterruptible. Holy crap, man. This set seems like it's going to be really, really good in PvP. Enervated Accuracy. While under 50% stamina, you gain 15% crit chance. Cleansing Second Wind. Cleanse slows and roots on yourself if you become exhausted by dodging. Oh my god, that is so good. And then Speedy Recovery. Gaining 10% haste for 4 seconds after exiting the exhausted state. Yeah, this one looks really, really good for PvP. We got the Protector's Blessing set at 2 pieces. When you apply a heal to a target above 50% health, you gain a stack of Protector's Blessing, cooldown of 2 seconds for 5 maximum stacks. While at max stacks, you are inflicted with a 7% rend, and healing an ally that has more than 50% health will add a 15% fortify to them. And then the 4-piece for this, gain 3% base damage bonus per a stack, and while at max stacks, if you heal a target that is below 50% health, the stacks are consumed and they heal for 10% weapon damage every second for 5 seconds. Now the question is, does this apply to self? Because that could definitely change how you use this set. But 3% base damage bonus per a stack, that's a 15% base damage bonus. That is no joke. This could be very interesting for a healer damage hybrid. We'll see if we see something like that in this patch. I feel like this will be the patch. We'll see those things. Then we've got overcharge set. 3 pieces. Hitting an enemy within 5 meters or killing an enemy grants an overcharge stack. 5 seconds cooldown. Each stack increases your base damage by 5% and affliction resistance by 10%. You are also inflicted with a 4% rend per a stack. And getting hit will remove all your stacks. There is a max of 3 stacks. Oh my god. 5 equipped max overcharge stacks increased to 5 overcharge stacks. Now also increase stamina regen rate by 5%. I'm not sure how good this set will be because you can't get hit in order for this to be an effective set. So we'll see how that one plays out. Elementally charged set. 2 pieces. Magical weapons do 7% less base damage, but they store a charge of that weapon's element for 20 seconds. Activating an ability of a non-magical weapon will consume the charge and add 10% base damage of that element to the weapon's attacks for 10 seconds on a 3-second cooldown. The 4-piece, you can now store 2 charges of each element. While at 2 charges, you gain 10% resistance to the damage of that element as well. This is kind of interesting. I mean, there could be some cool stuff here for sure. And this one also has some infixes on it. Elemental Hunger. While you have no elemental charges, you take 5% less elemental damage. Elemental Mana Battery. For each stored elemental charge, you gain a 20% mana regen rate. And then Elementally Energized. When consuming an elemental charge used by a non-magic weapon ability, you gain a 20% stamina regen for 10 seconds. And then Elemental Rush. When consuming an elemental charge by using a non-magic ability, you gain a 10% haste for 5 seconds, but it consumes 30 stamina. This seems really bad, but interesting set. There's definitely some good stuff in here. Now let's move on to the next set. Oh my god, we're going through all of them today. We've got the Stifling set. There's 2 pieces. Hitting an enemy with an attack while all of your active weapon abilities are on cooldown. Silences your target for 2 seconds and yourself for 1 second. This can occur only once every 5 seconds. And then on the 4 pieces, while silenced, you do 10% more base damage with basic attacks, and hitting a target will reduce ability cooldowns by 5%. This seems crazy trolly. Oh my god, man. I can imagine something like a greatsword with just the spin, trolling everybody by applying silence to everything around it. For the infixes, we've got the Stifling Resolve, gain 10% damage bonus or damage absorbed while silenced. We've got Stifling Danger, damage is increased by 5% when hitting a silenced target. Stifling Evasion, exiting a dodge while silenced will trigger an AoE that damages nearby enemies. And then Stifling Energy, gain 50% stamina regen while silenced. What a weird ass set. I'm excited to see what kind of builds we'll see from this one. And then we've got the Tenacity set. And this one has, for 2 pieces, you get Grit for 2 seconds after getting staggered. However, you take 5% more active damage while Grit is active. And then at the 4 pieces, you get a successful light attacks will apply Grit for 3 seconds on a 6-second cooldown. And while Grit is active, you also gain a 5-second lifesteal. Very interesting, very simple set, adding a lot of Grit. We might see this quite a bit in PvP as well, because that's a really good uptime for Grit off those light attacks. The Tenacity Penetration, armor penetration is increased by 10% when hitting targets with Grit. The next infix is Tenacity Critical. Critical chance is increased by 10% while Grit is active. Tenacity Rebound, enemies receive 5% damage when they hit you with a melee attack while Grit is active. And then the Tenacity Recovery, incoming heals are increased by 10% while Grit is active. So this could be an insanely good set. I mean, it looks like a really good set. I'm curious how people will use this. Anyway, moving on to the next set, we've got the Focus set. On the 2 pieces, we get 15% increased healing on targets outside of Sacred Ground or Beacon. And then the 4 pieces, healing is increased by 15% and cooldown reduced by 5% on heal after holding a weapon for 10 seconds. Interesting. So I'm assuming this is going to be every 10 seconds you get a little bit of a bonus healing and some cooldown reduction. Seems like a good healing set. For the infixes, we've got Focus Cleanse. Self-casting Light's Embrace will cleanse the player and make them immune to debuffs for 2 seconds. This requires 300 focus and has a 15-second cooldown. Very powerful. We've got Focus Determination, immune to crowd control, debuff effects for 1 second, 3 seconds with 300 focus. After a healing cast is interrupted, and that has a 10-second cooldown. This is going to be really nice for PvP, I think. Then we've got Focused Fortify. Healing targets under 50% health with burst heals will receive a 100% Fortify for 5 seconds on a 15-second cooldown. That is an insane Fortify. That is double your armor. That's insane. And then we've got focus speed. Healing a target outside of sacred ground or beacon will grant a 10% haste for 4 seconds on an 8-second cooldown. So what looks like a very, very powerful healing set here. And now let's talk about the standalone infixes. These are the kind of new perks that are coming that are not attached to any set pieces or anything like that. They're just particular items that will have them. Critical Storm. Once every 0.5 seconds, when you crit a target, you gain a stack of Storm charge on yourself, lasting 10 seconds. At 6 Storm charges, hitting a target with an ability will consume all of the charges and trigger a bolt of lightning, dealing an additional 100% damage. Oh my god, man. That seems so powerful. I'm really curious how strong this is going to be and what item this is on, because 100% bonus weapon damage is huge. Thwarting stun. Whenever you hit a target with an active grit or uninterruptible, you deal 5% increased base damage to them and gain a stack of thwart. Melee heavy attacks while at 10 stacks consume all stacks and inflict a 1-second stun on the target, a 10-second cooldown on that stun application. Very interesting. Not really sure, again, what item it's attached to, but a really interesting perk. We'll see what it gets used for. Unstoppable. You gain grit on melee heavy attacks and during the melee light attack startups. However, you take 5% increased base damage from enemy attacks while grit is active. And I believe this is a ring perk, if I read correctly in an earlier thing where they talked about it. Alternating enchantment, we already know what this is. They just put Y% in here, so we might see the values change a little bit on alternating enchantment. Close quarters, light and heavy attacks with ranged weapons within 10 meters will deal 20% more damage, but you receive 5% increased base damage from attackers that are, I'm assuming, are within that 10-meter range. This could be very interesting for a bunch of different builds. Oh my god. Chain lightning, every 10 seconds, damaging enemies with a magic ability will cast a chain lightning that hits up to 5 unique targets and deals 50% of your weapon damage. However, when triggered, you take 30% lightning damage. You know, I'm not a huge fan of proc damage sets, but I do like that it damages the user as well. We'll see how this one ends up playing out. Empowering Heal. Healing an ally gives you a stackable buff that increases your damage dealt by 1% for 10 seconds to a max of 20 stacks. And then Adrenaline Burst. When your health drops below 50%, your critical chance is increased by 18%. Very nice. Shredding Backstabs. Backstabs penetrate 40% of your target's armor, but your critical hits deal 20% less damage. I'm really curious if that means the Backstab is also going to take that 20% critical damage reduction. We'll have to test this set out to see. And then we've got the Mo Mortar, Mo Boom. Mortar Charge now only fires 1 canister. It fires immediately and a bill bounce before exploding if it does not hit an enemy. When this canister explodes, it deals 130% weapon damage in a 5-meter area. Very interesting. This completely changes how mortar works and turns it into kind of like a fireball attack for the blunderbuss. Yeah. Then we've got Exerted Spin. Whirlwind no longer needs to hit targets to continue spinning and can spin up to 12 times. When the spins end, it consumes all your stamina and you become exhausted. Then we've got Revive. Casting Life's Embrace on a down player will revive them. This requires 300 focus and has a 45-second cooldown. This is probably going to be attached to a life staff. I'm not sure, but seems very powerful for PvP, at least open world where you can get downed. Poison Affinity, deal 15% more base damage to poisoned enemies. Very strong. And then Cleansing Block. Blocking an attack will remove 1 debuff on a 3-second cooldown. I'm assuming this is on a shield. That is a very good perk. And there you go, guys. That is all of the new sets and all of the new perks that are coming with this patch. Of course, the old perks have had a little bit of balance changes. If you guys want to check them out, I'm linking these patch notes down below so you can take a look yourself. I'm not going to go over them in this video because it just takes too long. But anyway, I would love to hear what you guys think. I hope you guys are as excited as I am for this upcoming update. As always, have a great night, everybody, and I will see you next time.